All right, so could you please just introduce yourself and then tell us about what you've been doing in your career or school since graduating from the Institute?
Awesome. Okay. So hi, I'm Amanda Ryerse. I was in cohort 5 of the Institute. I graduated in 2018 with a degree in electrical engineering and a minor in political science. So I joined right after college. I joined Booz Allen Hamilton. I work as a cyber threat analyst for them. So I'm analyzing essentially the technical behavior of foreign adversaries and kind of understanding the risk that comes with those and like planning and mitigating the risk that is associated with like foreign adversaries and their cyber behavior.
Amazing, thank you. And what are some of the biggest obstacles that you've experienced when transitioning from college to work?
I think that in college you have a set, like, you have to go to class at this time, you have set time to study this time, and I think so your schedule is a little bit more laid out, whereas in the real world, it's a lot of, not necessarily like, "Oh, you have to do this by this time," like, there's no consequences in the sense of if you don't get an assignment, like, you clarify. If you don't turn in an assignment right, you don't get a grade for that assignment and you fail, whatever. But in work, like, if you don't do something, it's not necessarily the same consequences, so the way that you approach your work should be different. But so I think that's kind of been the biggest transition is the way that you approach your learning and your work in the real world is different than how you would approach it in college, which is why I think, like, the institute was very helpful because it is a lot more modeled like the real world and, like, the fact that, like, if you don't do your work, like, that's on you, and, like, I mean, granted, yes, you consequences of, like, yes, you can get fired and all of that, but, like, it's not the same as, like, oh, like, your teachers aren't gonna hound you for stuff in the real world, oh, if you didn't turn something in, like, it's just a lot, it's very different in the way that you approach things, and I am
No, that's good, thank you. Um, and so what kind of unexpected changes have you been exposed to since you've graduated? And then what strategies did you employ to embrace those changes?
so I work in a field that is very unexpected. I think I work in the cyber field, and the cyber field, it's constantly changing. Like, there is not really, you're not doing the same thing day in, day out because, like, there's always new vulnerabilities that are out. There are new actors, new reports of cyber threats. Like, it just there it's constantly changing and growing and evolving. And so I think that's like so you just see unexpected changes all the time. But I think with that, like it teaches you a level of adaptability of like this is you learn not to get stuck on like, oh well, it was just this yesterday. Well, it's not that today. So you kind of learn to I'm gonna make a pun, embrace the change a little bit more and you're a little bit more adaptable and like, okay, like this is what it is today. And you're just constantly growing and constantly learning. And so I think it feeds a hunger for knowledge and a hunger for learning and growth. And so in that sense, like it think of in that sense, like I think it provides a level of adaptability. So like when use my language, shit hits the fan, um, you don't freak out and you kind of get a sense of peace and calmness. And so in that sense, I think been very helpful.
And then finally, what was helpful in your work that you learned from the Leadership Institute and kind of what you do now in the real world?
Okay, let's see. I think a couple of things. I'm gonna list them. So I think the biggest thing that the Institute one really helped me was and I think as younger people like in the like right out of college and then also as a woman like I do think that we tend to downplay our work and downplay our value that we bring to the team and I think the institute really was instrumental in like understanding like no like you do bring a good perspective you have a different perspective if they didn't want to hear from you like there's a reason that you were hired by them there's a reason that you're in this meeting it's
Mhm.
because like employers really do value different perspectives and I think that was been a big thing at the institute um
Absolutely.
really kind of instructed and I've seen that is like okay like no I'm owning my work I am doing like awesome things and like I do bring a different perspective because I am younger because I am female because of blah 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 the different backgrounds that you have So I think that was big, is like the Institute really does stress, like, we want to hear different perspectives, we want to hear different backgrounds. And I think that's been really cool to see that, like, those lessons I took and I apply now in the real world. I mean, there's a ton of lessons. Like, we could talk about crucial conversations and how important it is. Crucial conversations I use obviously with my roommates and with stuff, but I use with my boss. Like, for instance, we had to have a crucial conversation about understanding boundaries at work, and like in the sense of like, this is too much work, like for a plate, like you have to understand that as one analyst I can't do all of these things. So having, it's a hard conversation to have with your boss. So those conversations, practicing those and really learning about those in the Institute, I've applied. I see that all the time. And then I think the other, for me personally, I think the biggest lesson, I don't know if it's a lesson or just thing that I really, the words, is, so in college, right, I have a degree in electrical engineering. Electrical engineering is not the same as cyber, it's not at all, but I think a big reason that I am in the field that I'm in now is because of the Institute. And so when I was a sophomore, maybe end of sophomore year, early junior year, I like love current events. I love what's going on in the world. And so I really wanted to get a minor in either foreign affairs, political science, any of those. I love those classes, and I think they're so instrumental. And after having conversations with people in the Institute and with Professor Mormon, it really, she stressed like solutions today, right, are so multifaceted, and so like you need different perspectives. And so I got a minor in political science, which would never have thought it went with electrical engineering. And like, I think that speaks highly of, one, the Institute, but also of Miami encouraging cross class taking them and like learning experiences. And so I think, but also the reason I have the job today is because I had a minor in political science, and because I like was able to understand that like what's going on in the world today totally affects solutions that we're trying to implement. And so understanding that and being pushed in that in the Institute through books that we read, discussions that we've had, or just, and then now it applies. It's not necessarily like specific instances, but it's a lot of the conversations in the books that we read, and a lot of the like conversations and lessons like you really do take, and you don't think that they're going to apply when you're in this, because you're like, okay, like cool, I get it, but also this seems like what as a CEO you'd be doing. But I think if you're more prepared, like when you go into the workforce, there's a lot less of like the floundering that we tend to do when we graduate college, right? When you jump into the workforce, you're kind of like, wait, I don't know how to have this. I don't know how to have, like, how do I have this conversation? How do I approach boundaries? How do I figure out how to manage a workload? And I think the Institute really does prepare students for that. And I could talk forever about that.